For this exercise, the CFO of the airline has identified two major values that will need to be calculated in the future to better understand rates and adjust to a changing business environment. 1. The cost per mile for each aircraft in dollars. 2. The total revenue for each flight, assuming that there is now an additional 10% tax on all fares. With a few simple Excel formulas, we can leverage existing fields in our tables to address these changes. Let's start with the first question, where we are being asked which aircraft has the highest fuel cost per mile. In order to answer this question, we're going to start by creating a field that will calculate the total cost per mile for each aircraft. If we look in the aircraft data table, we see that we have the fuel cost per seat per mile in column D. But this only gives us the cost for a seat and not for the entire aircraft. However, the aircraft table also provides the seat capacity of each aircraft in column C. If we combine the information in these two columns, we'll be able to calculate the total fuel cost per mile for all of the aircrafts. We must also consider the fact that the fuel cost per mile is measured in cents, which is expected due to its low value. However, we're going to want to show the total cost per aircraft in dollars, since cents aren't a standard measure. To do this, we will need to take the total cost in cents and divide that by 100, since there are 100 cents in each dollar. Assuming that each flight is full, we can calculate the fuel cost per mile by multiplying fuel cost per seat per mile by the seat capacity of the airplane, and then dividing that value by 100 to get the total cost in dollars. We're going to be using a calculated field to perform this calculation, and then we'll use this field as input to a pivot table, which will give us the analysis we're looking for. So let's get started. We're going to start by creating the calculated field by navigating to the Power Pivot tab and selecting Manage. Within the Data View section, there is an option that allows us to select the data table that we want to add the calculated field to. The values we want to use are both in the aircraft table, so let's go ahead and select Aircraft Pivot from the list. There is an Add Column option on the right side which contains a formula bar that can be used to input the calculations similar to how regular formulas work in Excel. So let's go ahead and click on the formula bar to start editing the formula. Remember, we want to multiply the seat capacity field by the fuel cost per seat per mile field, and then we need to divide this by 100 in order to get a value in dollars instead of cents. So we're going to type equals, and we'll select the seat capacity field which populates in our formula. Next, we input multiply and select the fuel cost per seat mile field. Now we just need to add division by 100 and we are done with our formula. Next, we need to provide a new name for the new field. Let's call it fuel cost per mile in dollars, since it's consistent with the naming of the other fields. We're almost done with creating the calculated field. All that remains is making sure the field is formatted correctly. To do this, let's navigate to the Formatting tab and select Decrease Decimal, which allows us to adjust the calculated field to 2 decimals. Now that we have created the new field which calculates the total fuel cost per mile for each aircraft, we're going to create a pivot table using this data to determine which aircraft has the highest fuel cost per mile. Let's create a pivot table in a separate tab, just like we did for exercise 2. So let's head to the tab named Pivot 3A. We want to place the pivot table in the top left corner, so let's select cell A1 before navigating to the Power Pivot tab on the ribbon. Here we select the pivot table option. It brings up a pop-up window where we are going to select the existing worksheet for the location of the table, and then we click OK to create the table. Next, we are going to drag our new calculated fields into the Values section, which provides us with the total sum of the costs across all aircraft types. We want to know the cost for individual airlines, so let's drag the aircraft type into the Rows section of the pivot table. Since we want to know which aircraft has the highest fuel cost per mile, we're going to right-click on the pivot table and select Sort from the largest to smallest in the menu. We can now see that the B737 aircraft has the highest fuel cost per mile among the aircraft flown by our company. Let's go back to the Exercise 3 tab and put that answer into cell G13. As part of the next question in Exercise 3, we're being asked to determine which flights have the highest total revenue. If we look at the flights table, we notice that we have the total fare for each flight in column H. We're going to create a new calculated field that allows us to calculate the total revenue by applying a 10% tax to the total fares collected for each flight. So let's head back to the Exercise 3 tab and let's get started. Just like before, we start by navigating to the Power Pivot tab and selecting Manage. Within the Data View section, there is a list of available data tables. Since we want to calculate the total revenue based on the total fares that can be found in the Flights table, we're going to select Flights Pivot from the list. Next, we click in the formula bar on the right side of the window to start entering our formula. Remember, the total revenue is going to be equal to the total fares minus a 10% tax. Hence, we are going to multiply the total fare by 0.9. So let's type equals, and then we select the total fare field which populates in our formula. Next, we add multiply, type 0.9 and press enter to close the formula. Then we're going to name this new field total revenue. Now that we have created our calculated field which provides us with the total revenue per flight taking into account the 10% new tax, we're going to create a pivot using this data in order to determine which flights have the highest total revenue. We're going to create our pivot table in a separate tab again, so let's head to the tab named Pivot 3B. We want to place the pivot table in the top left corner, so let's select cell A1 before navigating to the Power Pivot tab on the ribbon. Here we select the pivot table option, which brings up a pop-up window where we are going to select existing worksheet for the location of the table, and then we click OK to create the table. Next, we are going to drag the total revenue field into the value section, which provides us with the total sum of all revenue across all flights. But we want to know the total revenue on a flight-by-flight basis, so let's drag the flight ID into the rows section of our pivot table. As you can see, this produces a large list of flights and their corresponding revenues. We want to see which flight has the largest revenue, so let's right-click on the pivot table and select Sort from largest to smallest in the menu. We can now see that there are 4 flights that all have the highest revenue, so let's go ahead and copy these values. Next, we're going to navigate back to the Exercise 3 tab, and we're going to paste our answer into cell G17. The final question in Exercise 3 asks us to provide a visual representation of the revenue distribution across all flights. This chart is going to rely on the total revenue field that we just created, so we don't need to create a new calculated field. Instead of using this data to create a pivot table, we are going to use it to create a pivot chart. So let's get started. First, similar to what we did with the pivot tables, we're going to select the cell that we would like to place our chart in. Here we have been provided with a chart area. Next, we navigate to the Power Pivot tab on the ribbon. Select the Pivot Chart option. We're going to drag the flight attribute into our axis section and the total revenue attribute into our values section, since we are using this field as the value of measurement. The chart that we just created provides us with the basic view of the various revenue levels across flights. To sort this from largest to smallest, select the drop-down in the bottom left corner that says Flight ID and select More Sort options from the menu. This brings up a pop-up window that allows us to sort the data in the chart. Select descending Z to A and pick Sum of Total Revenue from the list. Click OK to confirm. Finally, we're going to change the name of the chart by selecting the placeholder text and replacing it with Total Revenue by Flight. We can now see that there are a few flights with very high total revenue amounts with a significant drop-off after this level. In this section, we'll learn how to create and store calculated fields in Power Pivot and then use these new fields to create Power Pivots and Power Charts. Now it's your turn to practice what you just learned in the student workbook.